All right then, Ryan. With that, just special thanks to Ryan. Our old Greenville friend, and that headed off, but still is very much a Greenville resident at heart, and he volunteered to um, speak today when he was the first person I went to when we had to make some changes to the schedule. So special thanks to Ryan. Thanks again for everybody for showing up and coming. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Baisley.
All right, thank you, Mike. It's good to see everyone today, and it's good to be back talking to my fellow Greenville colleagues. We're going to cover today something that I've learned in my time doing security operations in professional services. It's going to cover basically two organizations that I've had the opportunity to work with while doing some consulting work. And hopefully, obviously the goal is some of the lessons I've learned, maybe if you're in security operations, you have the opportunity to apply some of those. If you're not in security operations, maybe it piques your interest to work in that field in security. And I know many of you are in college or working on getting into the security field, and this may be just additional information for you, may pique your interest as well to explore this field further. So just quickly, a little bit about me and my personal purpose. I'm a husband, father of two. My oldest turns 2 tomorrow, and then I have a 4-month-old as well. I am a consultant. I do consider myself a relationship builder. As many of you I know here on this call have good relationships with and know very well. I am a Christian, a lifelong learner. I do love working with nonprofits. I am, as Mike said, a B-Sides Greenville organizer, and I enjoy to travel. So I went through this exercise at a professional services firm, and I want to share it with you all because, and it also mirrors a book I've been reading, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Not really related to talk on obviously security operations, but maybe something just to encourage you with, is to develop a purpose statement in life and what you do and some actions that you're guided by. So my personal purpose here is to find life's meaning so that boldly we reveal our true self. And when at my best, I bring my purpose to life guided by a set of actions. I ask questions, I encourage others, and I serve others. And by living my purpose every day, I actively build a world. I imagine a world in which people seek out new opportunities that challenge their potential. People feel validated in their decision-making after receiving counsel and being encouraged. And people consider thoughtfully on what they want and are empowered to pursue their desires. That transitions to our purpose today, to where hopefully we accomplish 3 things. We explore lessons learned from security operations. We share about what life was like working in security operations. And then, like I said, we encourage people maybe who are early in their career or who are looking for a career change maybe to try out SecOps. So the first lessons learned involves security operations operating model. So like I said, I worked in 2 organizations, and I'll describe these organizations to you first. They're both life sciences organizations / pharmaceuticals. Both are multinational, global. One is based, headquartered actually in the APAC region. The other is headquartered here in the US, actually not too far from where I am here in Chicago. And both, extremely large revenue-wise, large security teams. Both, though, have different operating models, which was interesting to be a part of. The first organization, their operating model, and I guess I should describe what I mean by operating model. It would be probably obvious as I went through, but it's how they're structured team-wise. So the first organization, pharmaceutical company, they had a US team lead, and then they actually used an outsourced SOC with all of the analysts sitting there in Romania. and they used a leading SOC MSSP provider, operated 24/7. The second organization I worked with, they actually did things a little differently. They had a US-based team lead, but then they had in-house folks in global delivery centers based both in central Mexico and in India. In each location had 4 to 8 analysts, and they covered a 24-hour period. And this shared service model, global delivery center model, was really helpful to them because not only were there SOC analysts and IR analysts there, but they had network folks, they had forensics folks, general IT practitioners as well. So when we needed something, we were able to quickly go to those individual teams, and the people in those locations from an IR security operations perspective knew who we needed to talk to and had pre-COVID relationships with them, and would sit in the same office. The second organization I worked with, they were going 24/7, but one of the issues we did run into is kind of a lessons learned was staffing is really difficult, and many of you know this here in the US, and it is extremely difficult in India and Mexico as well. It's probably not a surprise to that. We did have some turnover there. We actually had to move back to 24/5 and make the adjustments needed there to accommodate. So lessons learned, quick highlights, is that varying operating models can work, whether it's all in-house or whether it's outsourced. I did notice that the bond was definitely stronger even between me and the team. When everybody was in-house, the teams were obviously stronger because they knew one another. But like I mentioned, some of the challenges were, recruiting was hard. The quote going rate for finding talent in both Mexico and India has gone up significantly. So, and this organization did face some legacy HR challenges with getting equitable pay based on current data. And then another interesting thing many of you may not be aware of is that in India, when you're trying to hire someone, there's actually a 90-day notice period. And this led to, this organization may be making an offer to an individual, them then having to wait 90 days, or they may have already been within a 90-day window, and they were simply shopping around now that they had an offer in hand, trying to find a better offer. So the next area, lessons learned bucket, is the area of process and the importance of having process. And I did this mostly at the second organization that I was with, where my responsibility when I went in was to develop processes that were not in place. And so we focused really on 4 buckets or so of documentation that the team needed that was not currently in place. So they were triage playbooks, investigation playbooks, threat hunt playbooks, and then we also had operations type playbooks. So the triage playbooks, these were more focused on how an analyst would action an alert based on a tool and weeding out noise. One of the things that I thought was new to me was using OneNote or some other tool where we had kept a list of known behaviors in the environment. So this was certain applications that may run, that may generate alerts in the EDR. It may be specific processes and process trees that would flag alerts in the EDR solution. So we wanted to document those so we could easily, analysts could review the known behaviors at the beginning of the day, see an alert and realize, oh, that's something we don't need to worry about. We can set that as ignored. We also had a known malicious behavior OneNote notebook that was based on MITRE attack techniques that the analysts would also review against. Investigation playbooks, these focused on kind of deeper analysis. And we had originally set out to match each category outlined in the Verizon DBIR, which ended up being like 11 or 12 investigation playbooks that were in scope to start. And as we started writing them, we realized for this organization, we could really bucket those into three. That was malware, DDoS, and other. And we tried to go in and answer key questions. And those were, this was malware focused. Is this ransomware credential theft? Has activity been automatically blocked by a tool? Is the activity new? Is the activity spreading or localized? Is the activity malicious? What's the source? And is the threat action internal or external? And so we would help guide the analysts through these steps and these questions, trying as hard as we could not to be restrictive and prescriptive, so that analysts would still be able to move and have gut reactions and make their own judgments based on what they were seeing. And that was a very delicate and fine line to try and walk. Operations wise, these may be better titled as job aids, depending on your terminology and how you do it. So these were based on specific tool actions and tasks that you may accomplish for the various security tools, metric reporting. We had a daily handoff that we did that, we would document metrics in there and what to talk about. We documented threat hunts, performed specifically in tools, whether that was a proxy service, the EDR, email, and we had those. And then one of the items that we actually developed much later, and it was the recommendation of a colleague who joined us and was hired on, was more of like a cover book, an IR SOC cover book. And this was kind of a one-stop shop for a new hire. And it contained things like an operations guide for the org chart, what the tool set was, and then the list of other documents that we had compiled at that point, so that when new hire came in, we could say, here's this document, and they had what they needed to go and start learning about the documentation set for the environment. So lessons learned. You really cannot have enough documentation. I know, and we try to keep this in perspective of a new hire, someone who comes in and may not have the full understanding. Yes, your mid-level and your senior analysts are not going to pick up maybe the investigation playbook every time, but that new hire who's just coming in and is maybe getting familiar with process, there's not enough documentation that they can have that would not help them. So that was key. We had to be very thorough. Again, walking that fine line between being prescriptive and giving leeway for analysts to make gut reactions. And then my colleague had these 3 points. I call them his ABCs when writing documentation. Make sure that there's accuracy, brevity, and clarity in your writing. And I write that down and I keep that in mind now as I write documentation, because nobody loves 100-page documents like you get with some reports and processes. Sometimes you can say a lot less in 7 or 8 pages. All right, the next kind of lessons learned bucket was reporting and keeping track of stuff. Again, I'm going to focus on the second organization I worked with. And some of the various items that we kept track of and reported on, and how we did it, I think that may be helpful for some of you, is one of them's major incidents. And first of all, I say, if you don't have a ticketing tool, you got to find yourself a ticketing tool, whether that's super big ServiceNow. When I was in legal, and my former boss may be on the phone, I don't know, we used something called Sharewell, and it was just a place to keep stuff and track stuff. Absolute must. But then there was some things where we needed a little more flexibility, and we turned to OneNote for that. So for major incidents, what we would do we would use a OneNote, and after triaging and realizing something was a little bit bigger than normal, we started to use OneNote to do a few things. We would start to develop a timeline as far as what happened, when it happened, how it happened. We would start setting up kind of decision trees, decision log. We would draft incident summaries in the event that we were going to the CISO, legal, other IT leadership, so that we had, 6 sentences or whatever it may be to give them a high level of what was going on. And we found OneNote to be really helpful for that. We also did daily handoff reporting, again, working with a team in India and Mexico, and having them overlap. We needed to be able to make sure that anything that, say, the India team worked overnight for the US hours and the Mexico hours was handed off. And any incidents that needed to be followed up, we used OneNote for that. Any threat hunts that the team did that may need further analysis, and we would incorporate the daily handoff reporting used in OneNote into a call to make sure that anything was seamless there. And we would have a daily call with the team, and then we would have a handoff call between both teams to make sure that any escalations and such were taken care of. Another thing for keeping track was a daily shift checklist. So this was kind of supplemental to our operations guide on the daily handoff. And this gave guidance for naming conventions, test call procedures for a SOC hotline, checking any other relevant mailboxes, a phishing mailbox, a general security mailbox, whatever it may be, and then trying to give a priority order for what to review. And then that kind of all wrapped up into a weekly status update where we gather highlights, talk about HR, people items, development, review any new threat intel that had come in, go over IR items of interest, and then there would be IT ops related items as well. So, lessons learned. Much can happen over the course of the day. Many of you security know that. And if you don't have someone working overnight, a lot can happen between 6 o'clock and 6 a.m. So just making sure that you have everything from the prior day documented is crucial. And then let alone keeping track of things over a week, over a month, over a year, and trying to track trends. One of the things that my peer colleague was very heavily on and instilled in the team was looking for anomalous metrics. And what I mean by that is looking for what is rare, and not necessarily rare just in general, but what is rare in your environment. So for instance, we would do LOL bin hunting, living off land binaries, and we would look for executions. There were certain LOL bins that rarely, if ever, kicked off in the environment. And our EDR tool, we were able to go and search that across all LOL bins over a 30-day period. Well, we would search and we would have rules that would kick off if something flagged that over a 30-day period prior had not. So that was considered rare in our environment. So that may be something to think about for your environment. And then, encourage your teams. I know from a leadership perspective, we don't want to be super prescriptive and, you must do this. We need to give teams flexibility, but encourage as much as you can for them to document as extensively as possible that's within reason, and make updates to that documentation as much as is needed. Because there were oftentimes we would find ourselves working an incident from maybe the EDR platform or in ServiceNow, and there may have been someone from the team who was off shift that day because they didn't work Monday through Friday. They worked like Monday. They worked 4 4s, if that's how you say that, or 4 10-hours or whatever. So if they were off a day, but they had a ticket open and there was something that kind of had come up, there were no notes, we were kind of stuck. So just encourage your teams to document. Our next bucket is transition to operations. And this goes back to the first organization that I had the opportunity to work with. And my colleague, he called this TOPS. So you take transition to operations, you get TOPS. And this was kind of our process for building out, moving from one managed service provider to another managed service provider. And so we would have a document, and this managed service provider, number one, they managed all the tools, processes, etc. Well, we were moving to another one. So the document included things like making sure all architecture diagrams, wiring diagrams, IP and URL information, vendor information, key processes such as health checks, break fix, config and change management, patch and version management, service requests, user administration, those key processes, all of that was documented over here with organization MSSP number 1 and moved to organization MSSP number 2. And this was key to make sure that everything was seamless, because at a certain time, organization 1 was going to go away completely, and any historical knowledge they had, poof, was going to be gone. And so this was a multi-month project, and just kind of how we did it was we obviously built our plan to transition. We had to know what work products we wanted to have. And then as we kind of move stuff along with training and knowledge dumps and transfers, we hit the point where we did a passive parallel run where each organization was doing the same thing. And there was some communication and dialogue between the two. And then when we were ready to kind of sever the ties, we moved into a stage we called hypercare, where our focus was on the second organization, picking up and going forward. And then the second organization going forward and doing everything with very minimal, if any, help from that first organization. So some of you may be thinking, oh, I'm going to transition. Providers could be even just managed IT services. It doesn't necessarily have to be security related, but having some type of process for transition is going to be key to ensure a smooth, successful operation. My former boss, who I said may be on the phone here, I'm not sure, he would always tell me this, and he's former Army, and George Patton is credited with it. You fight like you train. So one of the things, key lessons, is train your people. And in the second organization, how we approached this was we actually had developed a skills matrix. So we took and kind of identified 20 or so skills that we wanted our analysts to have and to develop to become better security analysts. So what we did is we kind of created a mapping or a matrix, and then a catalog basically of free courses, of resources, of B-sides material from across the world. And then we mapped that in videos and talks that had been done. We mapped that to specific skills, from incident handling, network forensics, memory forensics, Windows systems, Linux systems, the list goes on, that an analyst would need to kind of have understanding about and when working in the environment. And so then we encouraged them. We had paid stuff, we had free stuff, and then we had required courses that were outside of, typically the general bucket of HR training that analysts should go through. Then we supplemented that with group training. One of the challenges we faced there with group training, as you can imagine, spread across the US, Mexico, and India, was trying to find a conducive time that all of the team members could do that. So we were in 3 time zones, I think, at least 3 time zones, 2 continents, and it ended up being that our folks in Mexico, they had to start at 6 a.m. and our folks in India, they would end at like midnight. So and that was all they did that week. The other team members covered the shift, so you got to have a plan in place for that, and then let them focus on their training. The life of the packet. This is a lesson that I've learned actually at neither organization, but from a colleague who used to run the Cisco SOC. And he termed it was actually an internal initiative I worked on when I was in professional services, and he termed it the life of the packet. And so he kind of broke down this framework that hopefully, maybe gives you a different way of thinking of something. But he broke it into operational, tactical, and then strategic. And so in operational, what you would do is you would map each data source you have to an outcome. And then you would think, what did you hope to gain from that? So for example, you would have, in general, say net ops, and you would think of like Cisco stuff, or you'd have your IT ops, and you would think of servers, domain controllers, and then other app servers, whatever. You think of your SOC and you think of endpoints, firewall logs, network activity, Windows logs from logins, who's accessing the network. So you'd have this data and where it is and how the packet, a data packet flows, because everything's in a packet. Then you'd move to tactical. And tactical was really the time to detection. And you'd have to have the right data source to know what's going on. Then you would map that data source to having someone with that right skill set. So you have Palo Alto. Well, you want to have someone who has Palo Alto or network security experience in the networking space to be able to help you understand the detection of that. Same thing with Windows. You want someone who's an expert or a professional in Windows. And then you'd map that to your outcome, which is kind of the strategic option, or maybe the indicator that you're looking to get. So going back to our NetOps example, NetOps Cisco, data you would typically get from that would help from a security perspective is IP address and port. IT ops, the server domain controller, you're going to get DNS information, you're going to get account info, you may get asset subnet information. And then from that SOC standpoint, you're going to get that endpoint information, which is going to include host name, potential hashes if you're using an EDR tool, and any URLs maybe. And then that strategic phase is going to be that time to mitigation. And this is where he had the saying that you wanted to automate the known, so automate known responses as much as you could, and then you would investigate the unknown. I'll say that again. So you want to automate the known and investigate the unknown. And then one of his final nuggets that I wanted to throw out here for you all was his what are the vectors of threats? And he had 3, and it's simple if you think about it. You had internal to internal threats, internal to external threats, and then external to internal threats. And all of those kind of weave together to understand that life of the packet. All right, this is our last lesson here, and this is being introspective with data. And one of the, it was a key item learned at the second organization that we were maturing before I left. And the lesson I learned here is to really dig deep into what you have. So look into the data. What types of alerts are you getting? What hosts are receiving alerts? What geographies are receiving alerts? And what business units or people are receiving the most of the alerts? And once you start mapping out this data and looking at it, and if you're tracking it in a spreadsheet or ServiceNow or your other ticketing tool, it's going to make it a lot easier. But what my colleague encouraged us to do was to try and figure out the trends, and this, very popular for like email. and business email compromise. You're having a lot of folks target people in finance or target VIPs, executives. But in this organization, we had operations in China. What about maybe this Chinese sites there, because there are multiple manufacturing sites, was it different than, say, manufacturing in India or manufacturing in Central America or South America? And so we were not quite there yet to be able to do this well, but it was something I wrote down to, as I moved on to keep with me going forward in other organizations, is to really try and dig into that data and see what trends you can pull out. This goes back to my comment earlier about trying to find what's rare in your environment. What IP addresses are uncommon, what domain names are uncommon. This organization, they'd have millions of domain name resolutions a day, but trying to find those ones and twos that maybe had lengths that were abnormally long, and being able to do analysis on that and see if those were trending over certain periods of time. That was all key to us. And it became really key when we had an incident like SolarWinds and trying to search back through data. So final lessons learned here were to really document the types of alerts, the locations, document your threat intel, being able to go back through. If you're using like a tip or something, great. This organization was trying to mature that process as well. And feeding that in. A lot of the threat intel is very noisy, as many of you know. So trying to figure out what is obviously actionable is difficult. But when it's stuff happening in your environment that maybe see over time, maybe a little more actionable than something you get from an ISAC. Challenges we faced here were finding rare occurrences in a large environment can be really hard. Like if you're looking for, base 64 encoded PowerShell, because you think that, very popular for kicking off a C2 connection and a downloader. If you don't know what the base 64 is and you decode it, great. Some tools are starting to do that, some still don't. But what we started to do was actually take the base 64 string and document that and copy that out. So as an analyst became familiar with what was normal, something that, first 6 to 8 characters of a base 64 string, you could tell this was different, and they could pick up on that. And then they would know, hey, I can skip this, and this. Oh, this is different. Let's throw this into CyberChef or some other base 64 decoder and see what we got here. And then, invoke expression or IEX, are those used in your environment? Those are very popular for adversaries. Looking for the term string. I learned that from the offensive security person there. And then one of the other ones I learned from an LOL bin perspective is in run DLL 32, command lines, run DLL 32 happens all the time. But what you're looking for to maybe find or start with identifying malicious behavior is looking for something that says start. So if you find something that says start in a run DLL 32 command line, it is actually starting something. And if you want to find out what that something is, and in our environment, it was 50,000 hosts. Over the course of a day, we may get 1 or 2 items that said start, when we would have pared down, prior to paring it down, a couple 100,000 lines potentially after some filtering. So a lot easier to investigate when you're being introspective and digging into that data than just kind of doing full bore scopes and not knowing what you're looking for. I would say that was the other challenge, is what is normal, what is not. Knowing what is bad was also a very difficult thing to kind of go through. we were lucky at that point to have someone in offensive security who was able to help guide us through what he would do, and what was maybe mapped out in MITRE or other tools like Vector for purple teaming that would kind of guide us to know what we needed to look for. So with that, I know that's not, a full hour talk today. And I told Mike when he asked me on, I think it was Wednesday, I wouldn't have a full hour talk. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I do have a few minutes. And other than that, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And I'll turn it back to Mike.
Thanks, Ryan. Anybody have any questions? I know Luke had one in the chat that I'd bring up, but wanted to see if anybody else had any other questions. Anyone? All right, so Luke asked, so when considering equitable pay, I'm curious how this works when you're hiring remote InfoSec professionals in different areas of the US or the world. You pay them equivalent if they were local, or pay what the skills work are worth in their home area?
So this organization, and I think other organizations probably like them, they pay what is the going rate and their home area. So in India, obviously currency is very different. It's currently based on the home area. Like I've said, it has become, for example, like it's almost 2.5 times maybe from even just a couple of years ago, what base, maybe recommendations from what I gathered in my conversations with the team lead, from his conversations with HR, at least 2, maybe 2.5 times what someone in that area a couple of years ago would have been paid, should be paid now. So, and it's taking this organization time to kind of get up to that and realize to find talent, and find the talent they wanted, they were not able to pay what they paid a few years ago.
Sure. And we definitely see the need for cybersecurity and that awareness only growing, especially outside the United States, and where that just wasn't the case even a few years ago. I think that definitely is having an impact in those salaries as well, which is great, right? For all of us as cybersecurity professionals.
Yep.
One of the questions I was going to ask is, do you have any references that you use when developing the different run books and playbooks that you were creating for the SOC team?
So we based everything on MITRE. That was the framework that they wanted to use. Really, coming from professional services, we had reached out to others who had done run books for other organizations as kind of guides. We took some bits and pieces from that. And then really it was a lot of collaboration with the key stakeholders to understand what would work for their environment and what we needed to do there. So there wasn't like formal standards, so to say. A lot of it had been developed internally, took bits and pieces from that. A lot of maybe some stuff online. SANS has some stuff you may be able to massage and finesse. Their stuff's usually a little more broad. And then a lot of collaboration, hours of collaboration with stakeholders.
Sure. Which is good, which is how it should be, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day in professional services, our goal is to deliver what the client wants and what the client needs, and kind of marry the two together and help them maybe see what they need. So we don't want to come in and say you must do it this way, because that may not be the way that works for them.
Sure. So that makes complete sense. All right, last call. Any other questions?
Yes, I did have a question. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Dorian.
Hey Ryan. So I had a quick question. So you mentioned that training was one thing that you definitely would like to emphasize.
Yeah.
So regarding that, do you think that it should be up to whoever's doing the training, or do you think there should be more of a generic standard for that training, just to make sure there are the best results?
So I'm not sure I understand the question
Sure.
completely.
Okay, let me clarify. I'm sorry. So I'm saying like, do you think that, say for instance, it's just a company trying to train, do you think that do you think that they should put, have their own idea of what their workers should do as far as training, or do you think there should be a general standard over the companies as far as how they should be trained?
So I think it depends on the role. We want to map training to a role,
Sure.
and we want that training to be applicable to the role.
Sure.
So, and it may depend on sector, what specific training you do. So I don't know if you can make the general assumption that you want to have standard training across all organizations.
Sure.
I think it's specific to the job, specific to the sector, specific to a role. And then, one of the things that I think many of us in security know is you really can't just depend on probably your organization to train you.
Right.
But budgets are tight. There's stuff you probably are going to have to do outside, whether it's, I leverage my local library all the time to pick up
Sure.
books and to learn stuff. Home labs, um, you know, I'm gonna plug Chris Sanders, Applied Network Defense. His trainings and his coursework out there is top notch, and it's relatively inexpensive. You know, his couple $100 courses, they'll compete with a SANS course. Obviously, it's going to be different, but you're not going to pay $7,500. You'll pay a couple $100 and you'll get really good stuff. Scott in the chat, I know Scott. Scott's a big fan of Black Hills Information Security, and they do pay what you can. I think they just came out with another one not too long ago as well. So you've really got to get out there. And I'm going to plug our own B-sides. We do some free stuff, and we do very inexpensively paid stuff as well from top-notch instructors like Michael Holcomb. So, and others. And get involved with groups. Greenville, B-sides, got ISSA. I know Luke's on here. I think I saw maybe Eric, DEF CON 864. Get involved with that, or wherever you are. Look for groups like that.
Sure. Okay. Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yep.
It was a great question. Thanks, Dorian. Anybody else? All righty. With that, then, thanks again for everybody for coming. Special thanks for Ryan for not only presenting, but definitely all the work he does on B-sides, and get to see the reap the rewards of that, hopefully in a couple months coming up.